Vienna, 1907, just as the gas lamps flickered to life along the Ringstrasse and the scent of burnt sugar curled from the pastry carts outside the Burg Theatre. The imperial palace was in a state of anxious celebration. Archduke Leopold, third in line to the Austro-Hungarian throne, had returned from his military tour and was to be betrothed by decree. The empress herself had summoned seamstresses from across the empire to prepare the engagement wardrobe. Among them was a young woman from the outskirts of Salzburg, Tessaria Zeller. She arrived with little more than her sewing tools, a worn satchel, and the knowledge that her hands could coax silk into waterfalls and lace into breath. She kept her head low as she entered the Hofburg's servants' wing, but her eyes were sharp. Tessaria had been chosen not just for her skill, but for her discretion. What none of the courtiers knew was that she had once mended uniforms for officers on the Balkan front and had overheard things no commoner was meant to hear. The Archduke's fiancée, Countess Aliska of Bohemia, was still en route, delayed by floods along the Danube. That left the palace in a hush of expectation and sharpened whispers. Tessaria was assigned to the primary salon, where the engagement garments would be stored and fitted. The room was a prism of mirrors, velvet chairs, and gold leaf scrollwork. That's where she first saw him. Not in a grand hall or on horseback, but standing alone by a window, sleeves rolled above his elbows, binding a fencing wound on his own forearm with a length of white muslin. He wasn't the Archduke. He wasn't even dressed like nobility. But there was something about the way he wrapped the cloth calm, practiced, not theatrical. He looked up when she crossed the carpet, and their eyes locked. "You're standing in my light," he said. Not cruelly. Simply. Tessaria stepped aside. "Forgive me. I was told this room would be empty until midday." He tilted his head slightly. "Then they lied to you. Or they lied to me." She moved toward the wardrobe, silent. He watched her unpack spools of thread. "Are you the lacemaker?" he asked. "Seamstress." "Ah. Then you're the one meant to make my brother's bride look like an angel." Tessaria's fingers paused on a bolt of ivory silk. "And you are?" "Victor Halden. Second son of the Duke of Carinthia." She froze. That name. She'd heard it whispered once in the officers' mess, spoken with a mix of awe and resentment. He'd been the secret tutor to Balkan rebels before the empire silenced the uprising. A traitor, some said. A hero, said others. But he still bore a noble title, and he now stood only 2 degrees removed from the throne. Tessaria bowed slightly. "Then I should be more careful with my needle." "I hope not," Victor said, stepping closer. "I'd like to see what damage you can do." His voice was teasing, but not cruel. She kept her eyes down, but her hands were steady. "I work fast. I don't talk much." "That's a shame." He left then, just as quietly as he'd arrived, a trace of dried blood still darkening the cuff of his shirt. That night, in the seamstress quarters, Tessaria found a square of white muslin folded inside her satchel. It was the same one he had used to bind his wound, now stitched with a single word in blue thread, "Thank you." The next morning, he was there again. This time, he stood behind her as she pinned a sleeve to the bodice of Countess Aliska's engagement gown. His voice was low. "You stitched something into the hem." She didn't turn. "A prayer. For her protection." "Do you always sew secrets into your work?" "Only when I'm afraid for someone." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "And are you afraid for her? Or for me?" Their eyes met in the mirror. She didn't answer. He began appearing more often. Sometimes just watching, sometimes asking questions he had no business asking about lace patterns, about her life in Salzburg, about how she learned to sew with such precision. She gave him nothing but the truth, carefully trimmed. One afternoon, he asked, "Have you ever danced in the Hofburg ballroom?" She shook her head. "I've never even seen it." That night, a footman arrived with a summons. Not from the Empress, not from the bride-to-be, but from Victor Halden. The note was tucked beneath a tea tray. It read, "If you walk the eastern corridor after the bells strike 10, you will find the doors unlocked." Tessaria went. The ballroom was empty, save for the moonlight spilling through the glass dome and Victor standing beneath the great chandelier. He didn't speak. He just held out his hand. She hesitated. Then gave him hers. They danced. No music, only the sound of her breath and the whisper of satin against marble. His hand was warm through his glove. When he spun her, her braid slipped loose. When he caught her again, she was breathless. "You shouldn't be doing this," she whispered. "I know." Their palms pressed together. Her fingers trembled. "I'm betrothed," he said quietly. She stepped back. "To someone else." She turned away, heart pounding. "Then why?" "Because you stitched your way into my thoughts. And I can't get you out." She backed toward the doors, but he caught her wrist. "I don't want her. I never did. The betrothal is political. My father arranged it after the Balkan incident. They think it will silence rumors about me. Make me loyal." "And will it?" "No." The silence between them stretched. Then she touched her fingers to her lips and placed them on his chest, just above his heart. "I sow secrets," she said. "But I keep them too." Then she left. The next day, the palace awoke to scandal. Countess Aliska had arrived and refused the engagement. "I received a letter," she told the empress, pale and trembling. "From a woman. She said the Archduke's brother was in love with someone else. A commoner." Victor denied nothing. The empress was furious. The Duke of Carinthia threatened to disown him. Tessaria was summoned and questioned, though she denied writing any letter. "She's lying," Victor said. "I wrote it." "You?" the empress snapped. "To ruin your own match? To save a woman who doesn't deserve to be treated like a pawn." Victor was placed under house arrest within the palace. Tessaria was dismissed from service, forbidden from returning to the inner halls. Her sewing tools were confiscated. She was told to leave at dawn. But that night, a boy from the kitchen slipped her a note. "Meet me at the stables. Before first light. Bring nothing you can't carry." She went. Victor was waiting, dressed in his old military coat, a dueling pistol tucked at his hip. "They'll chase us," she said. "I know. They'll call it treason." "I know." She looked at him for a long time. Then she reached into her cloak and pulled out a folded square of cloth, the same muslin, now stitched with a single new word, "Stay." He smiled, full and real. They saddled 2 horses. As the bells of Vienna rang in the dawn, they rode into the fog. Not to hide, but to begin something new. Tessaria Zeller, the seamstress, and Victor Halden, the second son, rode not into exile but toward a betrothal of their own. One stitched in secret, but sealed in truth. The road south from Vienna turned to mud by the second day, the kind that clung to hooves and boots alike. They rode in silence for long stretches, not out of strain, but because the air between them was already thick with what had not been said aloud. The weight of what they'd done, the scandal, the defiance pressed against their backs like the wind itself. Victor led them off the main road near Graz, where the hills cradled vineyards and the locals minded their own. They found temporary lodging with a retired cavalry captain who owed Victor a debt from a winter campaign near Transylvania. The man, with one good eye and a voice like gravel, said nothing as he watched Tessaria dismount. But he did not ask questions when Victor requested a room with 2 cots and a door that locked from the inside. That night, Tessaria stood at the wash-basin, brushing the dust from her collar. The room was small, walls paneled in pine, the scent of wax and tobacco soaked into the wood. Victor sat on the edge of his cot, unlacing his boots. "Did you ever think," she asked without turning, "what you'd be, if you hadn't been born to a title?" He leaned back on his hands. "A cartographer. I used to steal my tutor's atlases. I'd draw coastlines I'd never seen. Entire ports. Sometimes I gave them names." She glanced over her shoulder. Like what? Port Requiem. A harbor where no ship ever sank. I was 10. She smiled, but it faded. And now? I'd name it after you. Tessaria turned fully, hands still damp. That wouldn't be safe. Neither is this. She crossed to the window and opened it slightly. The wind carried the scent of pressed grapes and cold earth. We can't stay here long. If your family sends riders, they'll watch the southern routes. They'll expect me to head west. Toward Trieste. Toward sympathy. She glanced at him, curious. And where are we actually going? He hesitated, then stood, moving toward a satchel tucked beneath the cot. From it, he drew a folded map, creased and worn. His finger traced a path eastward. There's a monastery near the border of Bukovina. It's been abandoned since '88. My brother used to wager cigars on dares that none of us could reach it and return before nightfall. And did you? I stayed 3 days. Brought back a bell clapper as proof. Tessaria leaned closer, studying the route. The terrain was mountainous, the roads unmarked. We'd need supplies. Warm coats. A mule, at least. I know a man in Sombathe who owes me half a life. She gave a short nod. Then we leave before dawn. Victor folded the map carefully, slid it back into the satchel, and fastened the buckle. You're not afraid. I am, she said simply. But fear doesn't undo what's already done. He studied her, lit only by the lamp. You could still walk away. Say I misled you. That I promised more than I gave. I never asked for a promise. He stepped closer, his voice low. But if I offered one now? She didn't look away. Then I'd hold you to it. He reached for her hand. She didn't flinch. His thumb brushed the pads of her fingers calloused from years of needles and pressing seams. Then he let go. They slept without speaking further, the silence between their cots a fragile thread, taut but unbroken. By morning, they were already miles east, the frost lining the fields like spun glass. The horses moved slowly, hoofs muffled against the damp earth. They passed no banners, no signs of pursuit. But neither of them believed they'd escaped. In a village near the Raba River, Tessaria traded one of her brooches filigree silver, a gift from a Hungarian officer long gone, for dried apples and barley groats. The shopkeeper, a woman with thick braids and a missing tooth, stared at Victor's boots too long but said nothing. Later, as they camped near a birch grove, Victor pulled a parcel from his satchel and handed it to her. She opened it to find a length of midnight velvet, thick and soft as dusk. You bought this? Traded, he said. For what? My signet. She looked up sharply. You had no right. I had every right. I won't be needing it where we're going. She ran her fingers over the fabric, then folded it carefully. You should have given it to a monastery. I just did. That night, the cold deepened. He lay awake listening to her breathing, steady as a clock. The fire had gone to embers, and it was nearly dawn when she turned toward him. If we reach the monastery, she said, what then? We stay, he said. We make something of it. And if the empire catches up? They'll find a man who chose silence over ceremony. And a woman who knows how to live in the seams of things. She was quiet for a long time. Then I suppose we'd better not waste what we've bought with so much. He didn't answer. He only reached across the space between them and took her hand not as a claim, but as a vow. And this time, she didn't let go. By the time they reached the foothills of the eastern Carpathians, the air had thinned and turned sharp with pine and stone. The mule Victor had acquired in Sombathe dappled gray and stubborn as a colonel carried what little they owned, cloth, bread, Victor's map, and Tessaria's shears wrapped in oilskin. They followed a path that wound through narrow gorges and frost-laced glades, barely more than a hunter's trail. Moss hung from the trees like torn velvet. The silence was unbroken except for the rustle of their steps and the distant call of mountain birds Tessaria could not name. A week passed. Then another. On the 14th morning, the monastery emerged from the trees like a half-forgotten prayer, its stone walls mottled with lichen, roof beams exposed in places where the tiles had vanished to wind or time. The bell tower stood at a slant, casting no shadow in the grey winter light. The iron gate creaked open with a push. Victor stepped through first, hand on the hilt of the knife he had taken from the saddlebag. Tessaria followed, her fingers brushing the carved archway as she crossed beneath it. The place smelled of dust and roots. Inside, the chapel was roofless, the altar cracked, but the cloister still held its shape, columned, circular, and silent. She tilted her head, listening. No birds. They avoid places where men once chanted, he said. She touched the edge of a stone basin, empty of water. Will they come back? He looked at her. Would you, if you were them? She didn't answer. They chose a corner chamber, where the walls had not crumbled. Victor cleared the floor of pine needles and old leaves while Tessaria inspected the beams for rot. A hearth remained, though the chimney was cracked. She set about making it draw smoke regardless. That night, the wind pressed against the shutterless windows, but the fire held. Victor sat cross-legged, shaving thin curls from a branch with the blade. We'll need food before the snow thickens. There's a village 3 valleys down. I can go in a day, return with flour and salt. I'll come, Tessaria said. You'd be seen. You'll draw attention alone. Victor's jaw shifted. They know my face. I'll cut your hair, she said. He looked up. You think that's enough? She unrolled her cloth pouch. It's a start. He didn't resist when she took the shears to his curls, though she saw his throat work each time the metal closed. She did not speak, only trimmed with slow, decisive strokes. When she finished, he looked younger, less like a man carved for ceremony. She handed him a shard of mirror they'd found in the vestry. He glanced at his reflection once, then handed it back. You've made me look like someone no one would notice. You're welcome. He reached for her wrist. And what do you look like now? She stilled. A woman who cut down a prince, she said. He let go. The next morning, they walked together until the ridge sloped into sight of the village. Smoke curled from chimneys, and dogs barked faintly in the distance. She stayed in the woods while Victor went on alone, shoulders hunched beneath his coat. He returned after nightfall. Barley, lard, dried plums, he said, setting the sack down. And a woman who asked if I was a tanner from Kalazvar. What did you say? That I was looking for work. Tessaria unpacked the food. They believed you? If they didn't, they let me go anyway. She poured water into the pot. Tomorrow, I'll start on the shutters. He sat beside the fire, rubbing warmth into his palms. You never told me what your father was. She stirred the pot. Dead. I'm sorry. Don't be. He was a drunk. Victor didn't speak. The fire crackled between them. He sold my mother's necklace for a bottle of schnapps. Left us with debt and 4 bolts of unpaid silk. I worked for 3 years to settle it. His voice was gentle. And your mother? Wrote letters she never sent. To a cousin in Trieste. To a friend who died in childbirth. To a woman named Magdalena who might have been more than a friend. Victor leaned forward, elbows on his knees. And you? I read them all. Then I burned them. She never asked me to, but I think she wanted me to. He looked at her for a long time. Do you want to go on? She nodded. So they did. The monastery took shape beneath their hands. Tessaria patched the shutters with wool soaked in beeswax. Victor repaired the roof with salvaged slates. They caught rainwater in barrels and stored it beneath the cloister eaves. She began to stitch again, small things at first, a pillowcase, a satchel strap, a patch for Victor's coat where the fabric had worn thin beneath his left shoulder. As the days shortened, he carved a shelf for her threads and mounted it above the hearth. She said nothing, but the next morning, he found a pair of mittens left beside his boots, lined with flannel from her blouse. They didn't speak of love. But when she stood at the edge of the cloister garden, clearing frost from the soil with her bare hands, he brought her tea without being asked. When he returned from hunting with a bruise across his ribs, she bound it without question. One evening, as the wind howled so loud it rattled the hinges, she set a tin ring on the table between them. "I made it from the binding wire around the barley sack," she said. He picked it up, turned it over in his fingers. "It isn't gold," she added. He looked at her. "That doesn't matter. Will you wear mine, when I make one?" She nodded. He slipped the ring onto her hand. It fit. That night, they lay beneath the same blanket, not because of the cold, but because a life had begun around them, quiet, unbeholden, and real. In the silence, she whispered, "There's peace in being forgotten." And Victor answered, "There's freedom in being found." A thaw came early that spring. The snow receded from the monastery stones in slow, wet sighs, revealing mossy outlines and broken tiles that had lain hidden for months. Water trickled from the hills, feeding shallow rivulets through the cloister garden where Tessaria had sown lentils between the roots of the old yews. The first green shoots broke through the soil the same morning Victor returned from the woods with a torn sleeve and a hair slung over his shoulder. "You're limping," Tessaria said, setting aside the mortar where she had been grinding dried nettles. "Stepped into a sinkhole near the ash grove," he replied, lowering the carcass to the hearth. "The ground's turning soft." She reached for his arm, rolling the fabric back to reveal a gash along his calf. It was shallow but angry. "Sit down," she said. "You'll infect it if you leave it." She didn't ask if he'd already tried to clean it. He eased onto the bench beside the wall. "I passed a shepherd's boy on the ridge. He had a lamb swaddled in his coat. Looked at me like I was a ghost." "You're not far from it, walking around like that," she muttered, dipping a cloth into warm water. "Did he say anything?" "Only asked if I'd seen his other sheep. I told him no and kept walking." She dabbed the wound, then reached for the salve she'd made from pine resin and goose fat. As she worked, he watched her hands, not with the fixed gaze he used when tracking game, but with something quieter. "You've learned to use herbs like a healer," he said. "I watched my aunt treat burns with onion skins and honey," Tessaria replied. "When my sister fell ill one winter, I tried to make a tonic from wormwood and bark. It tasted like bitterness and didn't save her." He was quiet a moment. "Then, you never told me you had a sister." "She died before I came to Vienna." There was no one left to tell. Victor reached for her wrist, gently. "You don't have to keep all your grief in your hands. They've carried it well enough so far." She tied the bandage snug and stood. "You'll need to keep off it for a day. I'll take the snare line tomorrow." He nodded once but didn't let go of her wrist. "I've been thinking," he said. "There's a carpenter's village east of here. They trade in cedar and hornbeam. If we brought them threadwork or mended cloth, they might offer us more than just flour." "I don't have a loom," Tessaria said. "You have skill. That's worth more than half their timber." She met his gaze. "You want to make this into trade?" "I want to make this into enough." The fire cracked in the hearth. She looked to the corner where she'd folded a length of undyed canvas, salvaged from the monastery's ruined sacristy. "There's a way to bind linen without frame or spindle," she said slowly. "It takes time. But I could make shirts. Trousers, even. And I could offer repairs. Tools, hinges. They might not remember me." "They might." Victor's mouth drew tight. "Then I'd rather be useful than remembered." She crossed to the hearth and knelt beside the pot. "We'd need to take turns traveling. I'll go first." "No," she said. "You'll stay until your leg heals." He hesitated. "You trust me not to vanish while you're gone?" "I trust you not to waste what we've built." That night, they ate quietly, the hare stewed with bitter herbs and dried plum. As the fire settled to coals, Victor reached beneath the cot and drew out a bundle wrapped in old cloth. He set it on the table between them. "I made this while you were stitching the shutters," he said. "Didn't want to give it to you before I was sure you'd stay." She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a wooden box, carved with care. On the lid, a simple design, a single thread winding through a needle, its tail looping into the shape of a mountain. She opened it. Inside, spools of thread rested in grooves he'd carved by hand, alongside a bone-handled awl and 3 needles set into slots lined with wool. Tessaria ran her fingers along the grain. "You made this for me." "There's nothing in me that hasn't been changed by you," Victor said. She closed the lid gently. "Then let's finish what we started." They rose before dawn the next day. Tessaria packed 3 shirts and a satchel of mended cloth. Victor handed her the map with the route to the carpenter's village marked in red chalk. He pressed his hand to her waist, steady. "You'll be back by dusk? If I'm not, wait until moonrise. Then come find me." He kissed her brow, then her cheek, and did not ask for more. She left with the sun behind her, a spindle of thread and purpose in her hands.